Hi, and welcome to Getting Started with Unreal Engine very quickly. We're recording this talk as a workshop for the Global Game Jam. If you're here for that, that's awesome. Game Jam is a wonderful way to get your hands dirty with a new piece of technology and really see something through from start to finish. If you're here not for a Game Jam, that's awesome too. We're just going to be covering a lot of aspects of Unreal very quickly and getting you up to speed as fast as we can. So before we do that, a little background on me. My name is Kyle Earp. I've been a professional programmer for like a decade now. I co-run a studio in Brooklyn, New York called Moving Pieces Interactive. Our first game is called Dodo Peak. It's sort of a retro arcade platformer available on Nintendo Switch and Apple Arcade. And most importantly, it is made in Unreal. A lot of people are actually kind of surprised when they find it out because our game is it's arcadey, it's kind of got simplistic rules, it's very cartoony. But Unreal isn't just for shooters. And I know when people think of Unreal Engine, the first games they think of are like Fortnite, Gears of War, Unreal. I guess it's been around for a while. But the engine is also used for a wide variety of things like Tetris Effect, the most recent Tony Hawk remake, Mixer, I believe. A huge variety of games can actually be programmed with it. And so don't let the fact that you don't want to make a shooter stop you from getting acquainted with this really stunning piece of tech. Now, before we go any further, I do want to make a big point for this presentation, which is that I can't teach you Unreal in less than an hour. That's crazy. Almost everything we talk about today you could easily have an hour video of its own. So what I am going to do is uh, teach you the ropes, get you started, so you can learn new things on your own afterward. Specifically, the majority of this course is just going to be installing, running Unreal, and then we're going to build a really simple, silly game, and I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing as I do it. And then at the end, I also just want to make a very important note on collaborating with others while you're working on Unreal, because especially if this is for a game jam, uh, the biggest failures I see in game jams are not people not figuring out how to make the code work, it's people not figuring out how to share code with each other. And so I want to help you avoid pitfalls in that area. So let's begin. So I've reconfigured the screen a little bit. I put my luscious hair into this ponytail so it stops freaking out the background removal as much. And you'll notice I've already got a web page open here. This is maybe the most useful skill you can have in game development. If you want to know how to do something or solve a problem, literally just type what you want to do into Google and see what comes up. If you don't already have that as a habit, that's probably the most useful thing from this talk you can take away. So I've searched for install Unreal. The first result is this download link. So I'm going to click that. It takes me to unrealengine.com. You'll probably see this choice between like licenses. This doesn't affect the actual editor at all. It's sort of just like legally them making you aware of what you're getting yourself into. If you make $1 million with this game that we're making, like you're gonna owe some of that to Epic. But these are the same executable, so I'm gonna just click this one for games and click download now. This is an installer for basically the Epic Game Store, actually. So if you have that already, you might already be good to go. I'll save it. I'm not gonna run it because I already have it installed. And they actually have a handy tutorial here. So if you fall off somewhere in what we're doing, this could probably help you too. Um, so you open up the Epic Game Store. As you can see, it's the client for the Epic Game Store. There's like a home screen. You can pick up the latest free game. So do that before you continue. It's a great deal. But we're mostly interested on the left here, this Unreal Engine button. We're going to click that. And then you see this sort of hub here of like Unreal News and tutorials and the latest release and all that. It's all fine and good. We're going to go over to the Library tab. And this is where you can set up your engines and projects for the game, for Unreal, rather. If you don't have anything here, you can click plus and then select what engine version you want. Uh, if you're just learning, you should probably just pick the most recent engine, which as of this recording is 426. I have right here. So you click plus, you add it, and then you click this install button, and then you go and do something else for a while, or grab yourself a cup of coffee, or a cola, or a diet cola, or water, or just any beverage, because it's like 10 gigabytes and it's going to take a second to download. Wow, mine downloaded really quickly though, because I already have it installed. So our next step is to click the launch button for the engine we just downloaded. You'll see a short loading screen pop up, and then we're presented with this new project wizard. I'll probably blur some of this out because this is like a computer I use for work. Um, but if you scroll down, there's this new project area. You can see there's things for like film and architecture and product design, which those aren't just aspirational. Unreal is actually used more and more in those industries, which is really cool. Famously, like the Mandalorian uses Unreal for like real-time special effects. But we are not filmmakers. We're making a game, so we're gonna click games. Then we're gonna click next. So this is where you're presented with Unreal's sort of starter projects. There's a good number here, and after this tutorial, if you have a specific kind of game in mind that is more similar to how these sound, definitely open it up, click around, see how logic is written out, because these are very good places to get started. You will learn so much just from seeing how these starter projects work. For our purposes, we're going to open up a first-person project template. This is where I should mention we're going to be using blueprints for this tutorial. Unreal has basically two ways of scripting logic into your game. There's writing C++ or this visual scripting language called blueprints. If you want to use C++, you'll also need to have Visual Studio installed or Xcode or whatever platform. But regardless of even if you have like a programming background, I'd actually highly recommend you start with blueprints, because blueprints it's so much more discoverable. You can find things without knowing they exist already. You can very quickly make changes. You don't need to recompile everything. It's just a really good way of learning how the engine is set up. It is slower than C++, but for what we're doing, that does not matter at all. So we're going to be using blueprints. Don't mess with that. You can set the performance as a precaution. I like to set it to scalable 3D just so it doesn't overload the system, especially while I am recording video. Don't want to strain the graphics card too much. Don't turn on ray tracing, or do. I don't know. It won't make a difference, but if you want to turn on ray tracing, go nuts. Just leave all the rest of this stuff alone. Select the location for this project to live, and then give it a name. I'll call it like tutorial 1. And hit create. And now the gears start turning and the project gets set up. And if you're new, this is probably immediately overwhelming. If you're familiar with like a program like Photoshop or a video editing tool, or even if you've played a game like SimCity, you probably kind of understand this layout. It's a central viewport where you're placing and manipulating and setting up your game, and then all of these tools and things you can put in the world around the edges, and then like places to adjust settings. We're going to go through this all by one. But let's start with the most important button, which is the play button on this toolbar at the top. I think you probably have a good idea of what it's going to do. It's going to play the game. So you click play. You have to click the screen itself to enable mouse control. So now it's registered the mouse, and what we have here is a pretty standard, extremely basic first-person shooter. You can left-click to shoot, and you can jump, or you can press space to jump, and you can aim with the mouse, and WASD to move left, right, forward, back. And I believe that's it. I don't think there's a sprint. No. So, very standard thing. Not really a lot of game here, but you'll notice if you shoot a cube, it will react, which is kind of nifty. Very important when you want to stop playing, hit the escape key. Because a lot of games will capture your mouse and you won't be able to click the stop button in the toolbar. So that was playing the game. Let's go through everything that we can mess with pretty quickly. Again, we have a lot to cover. Lots of information available in the documentation to see how everything works, but you'll see, first of all, in this top toolbar, we have save button. That's pretty important. Control S works as well, obviously. Things for hooking up with source control. You don't usually click a lot of these buttons that often. And then at the bottom here, we have the content browser. It's basically a glorified like file folder explorer. I'm going to click this button on the left here that shows the folder view. I don't know why that's not on by default. I've never seen anyone use Unreal without clicking that button. And you can just see sort of the layout of the project. There's these different folders. You can click through and see different, oh, there's some textures here. We're going to stay on the first person BP folder for now. On this left column, it's basically, if this were a painting, you can kind of think of this as like your palette, or if this were SimCity or something, these are like different buildings you could place. This side section is for placing primitives in the world. These aren't things that we've created. These are just things that come with Unreal. So if you want to put a sphere, you can sort of drag that in. And I'll talk more about positioning in just a second. On the center here, we have a viewport, and you can click on things. You can move around in it. There's a couple different ways of navigating inside of this viewport. The way I use is sort of the first-person shooter mode. Basically, you hold right-click, and then WASD lets you fly around the level. You can also go down with Q and up with E. And then you can change speed by moving the scroll wheel. You can go faster or slower. That's what I do. If you've played like Counter-Strike, I think this is how like the spectator mode works. So it's very, very familiar for me because I die a lot in Counter-Strike, and so I spend a lot of time as a spectator. If you come from a 3D background, the other way from controlling the viewport that I understand is more comfortable for people with those skills is you hold the left mouse button, and then you can drag and move around like that. Kind of like a car, I guess. This feels really weird to me, but for some people, this is the only way to do it. And then while you're doing that, you can hold right click and then navigate sort of up, down, left, right. So there's right click WASD, and there's left click to move around. And then obviously, you can just click on objects in the editor to highlight them. And that takes us over to this right panel where we have the world outliner. That's basically a list representation of everything that you're seeing in the level. So you'll see when I click on things, it'll select them on the right side. You can also click on things on the right, and it'll select them in the viewport, which is really handy. And then you'll notice as I click on different things, this bottom right panel, the details panel, changes and shows us details related to the thing that we've clicked on. So, we can click on the character, we can click on that sphere we made, and it shows us, different attributes, including the location, rotation, and scale of each item in the world. Now, the location, rotation, and scale are very important. That's sort of what's known as the actor's transform. Basically, in Unreal, everything is on a three-dimensional grid with an X, Y, and Z axis. You can see in the corner here, it actually is labeled. So if you select something and I drag this X value, it'll move on the X axis. If I drag Y, it moves on the Y axis. And then if I change Z, it goes up and down on the Z axis. Most people don't make changes by changing them in the details editor, though. What you do is you select an object, and then click and drag on these arrows. The same is true for rotation and scale. You can mess with those here in the editor and make things long and skinny. But you can also do it in the viewport by clicking these buttons up here for translate, rotate, and scale. So right now it's on translate, but I can move it to rotate, drag it in the editor, and I can move it to scale and scale it in the editor. And this is how the vast majority of your work will get done. So that's it. We can play with our changed objects, sear things in the world. Let's look at this though. We added this sphere earlier by just dragging it into the scene. One thing you might notice about it is it's not falling, and that's because in Unreal, things by default don't have physics. So one thing we can do to remedy that is to click on the sphere, go to the details panel that we were just in, scroll down, see the section labeled physics, and then I'm shot in the dark here. I'm going to check this box that says simulate physics, and sure enough, now physics are enabled. So I'm just going to delete that other sphere. That's sort of the basics of navigating the editor and putting things in the editor and moving them around. Obviously, that was a lot, and there's so much more we could talk about. But one thing that you'll probably notice is that we haven't really done anything that you could call game design. We haven't made any changes to how the game works. We haven't programmed any interaction between objects. We're basically just placing primitives in the world and enabling physics, which is fun, but it's not a game, really. So in order to make this more of a game, we're going to have to explore the concept of blueprints. And I mentioned blueprints earlier as sort of Unreal's internal scripting language. It's kind of an overloaded word. A blueprint is also just a collection of components and code that it's basically a thing that does something. And so right now, like these cubes we added in the level, they don't really do anything. They're not blueprints. They're just sort of these static objects. But let's say this first person character here, that is a blueprint, and we can learn more about it. There's several different ways to open up blueprints. I could go into the Explorer and click on the first person character blueprint here, or I can go into the World Outliner after I select it and then click Edit First Person Character. That pops up a new window just for editing that blueprint. Again, if you're new to Unreal, this is probably very, very overwhelming. And it still is, even if you know what you're doing at times. So basically, you have this panel on the left that's the components inside of your blueprints. These are sort of the things that actually go in the world. You have variables in here for the visual scripting language. On the right, another details panel for messing with whatever you have selected. Top bar, just normal like save. You can run compiles to make sure the visual script works. And then you have the event graph here, which is where all the magic happens. There's a lot here that we don't have time to go over, especially since this Star project also supports VR. So most of this code is actually just for handling virtual reality controllers. But there's certain words that might stand out to you. So we have this thing called event begin play. An event is basically where code execution starts, or where your gameplay logic starts running. So begin play runs when the actor is created in the world, or the game starts, or basically the first opportunity code has to run. It calls begin play. And what this code is doing is it checks if you're using a VR headset and does this little branch node here. So if this is true, then do the rest of it, and it sets up. It hides the non-VR gun and shows the VR gun. So this is all code here. At the very bottom is something we can maybe begin to understand. This is the code for actually shooting. So we have input action fire, which is for us is left click. Basically, when you left click, it plays an animation on the gun called first person fire, and then it spawns a new blueprint called first person projectile, which is defined elsewhere, and then it plays a sound. And you can dig in more here. You'll see that the code for actually figuring out where to spawn it is over here, and it takes the world location into account. But this is sort of, you can kind of follow from left to right, following the direction of the arrows, what the code is doing. So you click fire, plays an animation, spawns the projectile, plays a sound. This all looks very complicated, but as long as you stay in your lane, you can kind of figure it out. The other very, very important tab in the blueprint editor is the viewport tab. And this is the actual 3D representation. So if you click viewport up here in the corner, this is the 3D representation of the object as it will appear in the world. And you can see, again, this example has two guns because I believe this is the virtual reality gun and this is the mouse and keyboard gun. You can see like all the pieces. This is the camera, and you can move them in 3D space. So if I wanted to, I could actually just drag this gun. Okay, maybe not that, but I can drag this mesh further away from the camera, and then I can compile and save. We can go back to the example map. We see that moves out, and then if I click play, I made the game look really weird. So that's something, and we're game developers. We made a big change. I hit escape to quit. I move back to the first person editor. I'm just gonna hit Control Z to move that back, compile, save, and get it all fixed up. These are the sort of the basics of editing blueprints. So now we're gonna dive in and we're gonna make one of our own, and we're gonna try and actually turn this little toy into a proper game. So the simplest thing I can think of for us to make this a game with an objective is to add sort of targets for us to shoot. Because right now you shoot things and nothing happens. So there's a few different ways to create a blueprint. The one that I use most commonly is just going into the content browser, right-clicking, and then under Create Basic Asset, click Blueprint Class. This opens this, again, very overwhelming menu, giving you a lot of options for what type of blueprint you want to create. If you're used to programming, you're probably familiar with like type inheritance. Basically, every blueprint has a type. Most things are actors, and then there's special types of actors. And if all that's confusing, don't really worry about it right now. The editor itself actually does a pretty good job of explaining what each of these things do. Because we don't want a player to control this like enemy object we're creating, we're just going to start with an actor, which is sort of the most basic object. Like everything in Unreal that you can see is basically an actor. So I click that, and now we can name it. I'm just going to call this enemy. And now we double click on it to edit it. And you see we've got like a pretty empty viewport to work with. So let's start by adding a component to this 3D view. And the way you do that is literally you click the Add Component button. You'll see again, there's a huge amount of things we can click on. I don't have time to go into any of these. But this is a cube. This is like a component we can add. And I think we can all wrap our heads around a cube. So why not? Our enemy is still going to just look like a cube. I hit compile. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go back to the map. And now I can drag this enemy into the game world and place it. Now when I click play, we have this enemy just sort of hovering in space. My first thought, other than it doesn't have physics, is we should probably make it look a little different. I'm going to double back on this in a little bit, but you can change the material of an object by clicking on it and then clicking this materials panel. We can just kind of select anything. These all come with Unreal. So let's just make it look like clay bricks, I guess. Very grungy. Compile, save, go back to the map, and now we see this texture's been applied. The other thing is I want to do is add physics to it, and this is going to be very similar to what we did before. I'm just going to click the physics button when I have the cube selected, compile, save, play. So now we can fight this thing all we want, but let's make it actually do something when we hit it. So I don't know. This is a simple video game. How about you shoot it and it gets destroyed? So that brings us to the question of like how do we tell when it gets hit? Well, one of the blueprints that we haven't actually looked at yet is the first person projectile blueprint. So if we're curious like how that affects the game world, that seems like a good place to investigate. Double click on that to open it, and we see, in fact, the only code here is one event and then a comment that says add physics impulse to any physics object we hit. So if we want to handle hits, this might actually be a pretty good place to do it. Now, what this does now is when the physics engine detects that the projectile has hit something, it fires this hit event that has all of these variables attached to it that we can read. So right now it just reads the component of what was hit, checks to see if that component has physics, and if it does have physics, we add a force to that object that we hit, and then we destroy the projectile. If it doesn't have physics, then nothing happens, and you can actually see that when you play. So when I shoot this wall here, it doesn't have physics. Nothing happens. When I shoot this cube, the ball disappears and the cube moves. So that seems to be the logic controlling that aspect. And we can actually, again, just change things and see what happens. If I say make this velocity higher, so let's make that 1,000. Then now when I shoot things, they go crazy. Oh no! So let's make that a little lower. I kind of like it higher though, so let's make it like 250. Not 2,500, 250. Anyway, kind of digress there. Basically, what we want to do is, in addition to this physics check, we should probably check if we're hitting an enemy, and if we're hitting the enemy, just destroy it. The way we do that is pretty simple. I mentioned that actors all have a certain class, so an enemy is a type of actor. So one of the things we can get from the hit event is an actor, is like the actor that you're hitting. And you'll kind of just have to roll with me on this because explaining the whole type system in Unreal would take an hour. But basically, I need to convert it into an enemy. So I can create this cast node called cast to enemy. And then all I do here is I drag the execution into the cast to enemy. And basically, we have two outputs here, one where it is an enemy and one where it isn't. So if it's not an enemy, then just do everything we were doing before. But if we did hit an enemy, then we can destroy it. And so I can drag off this as enemy and hit destroy. And then I can compile and save. And I shoot it, and it goes away. So that's all well and good. I can maybe right click, edit, duplicate. I can have a couple cubes. I can shoot a couple different enemies. So that's a game. You could hide cubes all over the level, and then you have to shoot them all, and that's a game. But let's make it a little more chaotic. I think it would be cool if the enemies kind of spawned on their own. And so that'll take us to something that we haven't really gotten into yet, which is creating new objects. Right. So there's a lot of places that logic can live in an Unreal game, especially if it's single player and you don't have to worry about multiplayer and synchronizing actors and stuff like that. But for something that isn't necessarily assigned to your character because it's affecting the world, like spawning actors in the sky so they fall down, one place you could possibly put that is in the game mode. And game mode is basically a special kind of actor that is always running along with your game and is sort of there to set up default values and control game mode. So if you say like you have like a score, or like you could have a function that's like add score or something like that. So we're going to double click on the first person game mode in the blueprints folder. You'll notice our editor isn't there. That's because this is just sort of a default game mode. But if we want to actually add logic to it, we can click Open Full Blueprint Editor. And now this is probably looking much more familiar. So we're going to use one of the only events that we've ever learned about so far, begin play. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to type begin play. Whoop. And now we have our begin play event. And just to start, at the start of the game, let's just spawn an enemy in the sky. So the command for spawning an enemy is spawn actor from class. We search for the enemy class, we select that, and then we have to give it a transform. Now, a transform, again, is the position, rotation, and scale of an actor. And we can set that by dragging a pin off to the left and then clicking Make Transform. And now we have all of these things exposed to us. Just to start with, I'm going to pull this number out of nowhere, but let's say, like, let's spawn it at 0, 0, so the origin of the level, and then 1,000 units in the air. And I'm just we're going to try it and see what happens. This might be wrong. Oh, whoa, look at that. Okay, so that seems to be a pretty good spot. It spawns at 1,000 units up in the center of the map. In case you're curious, units in Unreal are supposed to be a centimeter, I believe. So this is 1,000 centimeters. Almost every other engine, a unit is a meter. So if you're used to other game engines, you might be typing in bigger values than you're used to. So we spawn an enemy. I think it'd be great if we could spawn an enemy like every second. There's a few different ways to do that, but sort of the simplest way is to create a timer. So I'm just going to search for timer and set timer by event. All this does is once an amount of time goes up, so like 1 second, it can call any event we assign. So I'm going to drag this off. I'm going to add a new custom event called like new enemy. And then I'm going to drag this over to here. I don't want this connection anymore. This, like, after we create the timer. So I'm going to hold Alt and click, and that deletes the execution line. And so now we have this thing after a second, it'll spawn an enemy. I'm going to go ahead and check looping. So every second, repeating, it'll spawn a new enemy. So I do that. I click play. It falls from the sky. Oh, look at that. Yep. So that's nice. It's getting taller. Stacking up. Ooh, what's going to happen now? Ooh, the physics breaks. Okay. So one thing that might be nice is if they don't all fall, get out of here, is that they don't all fall in the exact same spot. It would probably make the game more interesting too, although this is kind of fun. Ooh, coming right at me. So one of the most common things you'd ever want to do in a video game is put something in a random location. So randomness is actually very easy to access in Unreal. There's all sorts of random helpers. Just as an example, like if we want things to have a random rotation, I can drag this off and type random and just get a random rotator. How cool is that? So now, if I play, you'll notice the cubes are all at a random angle. And now they don't stack anymore, which is kind of a bummer. But regardless, I go back to the game mode. So we have a random rotator. There's helpers specifically for making random like location vectors, but what I'm actually going to do is drag this off and make a vector. A vector is just a combination of X, Y, and Z values, so it's 3 different numbers. We can keep Z at 1000, and then we can just set X and Y to be random values, and it'll spawn at a random location. So we can do random float in range. Let's do like -1000 and 1000. And now I'm just going to duplicate this node and drag that to Y. Once again, I don't have a full visual concept of this level. These numbers are just things I'm trying, and if they're not good, we can just change them, because it's so easy to make changes in Blueprint. So then we hit play. Oop, So you'll see these cubes are kind of falling from anywhere. And now it's actually kind of feels like if your goal is to just shoot all the cubes, it kind of feels a little bit like a game. You don't know where things are going to go. You have to come up with a strategy. You have to figure out like how to navigate. A cube every second, in my opinion, is pretty boring. I think especially if you're doing this for a game jam or something, more is better. So instead of every 1 second, let's do it every 0.1 seconds. Oh yeah, hallelujah! It's raining squares. So now we have a game. Now this is really cool. With only a few blueprint nodes, we have chaos. So let's see, what should we cover next? Oh, one thing that is still making this like trouble to track how well you're doing is we don't show you a score anywhere. So I think it would actually be pretty cool if we tracked how many cubes you shot. So again, I'm actually going to be messing with this on the game mode. And this will actually be our first variable we introduce. So on this left column here, oops, sorry. On this left column here, under variable, I'm going to click new, and it creates a new variable. We can call it score. We have to click this eye here to make it visible outside of the game mode, and we'll kind of get to that later. And then we have to make it a type that right now it's a Boolean, which is either true or false. We need to change it to an integer. And I'm just going to save. It starts at 0, which is what we want. And then let's let's also introduce our first function, which is another way of calling code on an object. So there's events, there's functions in Blueprint. They're largely the same. Events can be asynchronous, which if that means anything to you, basically like things can happen with like pauses between them. So we have this timer here and then that executes every such and such amount of time. You can't do that within a function, but for things like adding a number to another number, like a function's great. So we're going to make a function called like increase score. And then all that does is it takes the score, it adds, so I'm just literally just searching the plus value. It adds 1, which is the default value for the addition node. And then it sets that to be score. So I'm literally just typing set score to get this node up. And now anytime we call increase score, score will go up. So, but we don't want to call that from within the game mode. We actually kind of want to go back to our projectile. And after we delete the actor, let's increase, let's get the game mode and increase the score. So the way you reference the game mode, you can reference it from anywhere, which is great. So we just type get game mode. The problem is this returns like the default game mode class, and we want the first person game mode. So we're going to have to do a cast again. Cast to first person game mode. So that's all nice in there. And then we just call increase score. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, the biggest thing that maybe we should do is make the score visible. We're gonna add a heads up display in a second to show it, but for now I want to introduce you to maybe the most important node at all, which is the print node. And basically you can use this to print text in the editor. So right now the default is hello. So when I shoot something, you'll see in the upper left, the word hello shows up every time you hit something. So instead of that, let's just drag over the score. It'll automatically convert that into a string. And now, every time I shoot something, it shows the score, and every time I hit something, the score goes up. Isn't that fun? So, 19, 20, 21, 22. Awesome. So we have that in. Let's make an actual heads-up display, like an actual user interface for the game. This is going to be really quick and dirty, but most games have a user interface, so it'll definitely be something you hit. The way you create a new user interface in Unreal is a widget. So if you go down to user interface widget blueprint, you can call this like score UI or something, and then double click on it to open. It opens up this whole what you see is what you get sort of grid editor. Again, this could be a multi-week class just on designing widgets in Unreal. They're actually quite tricky, but doing simple things is very easy. I'm not going to explain much of what's going on here, but what you can do if you want to score is you click this text in the palette. They actually literally call it a palette here, which is kind of nice and straightforward. You drag it in. It's anchored, this weird star thing. This is the anchor. So this is anchored to the top left corner. So no matter what shape the screen is, this will always be placed in relation to the top left. So we can actually kind of drag it up over here. We have this random text block. I can drag the size, but in order to change the actual size of the text, you go here to font. Let's make it like 100 and change the default text to like 1, 2, 3, 4 so we know what a score would look like. In terms of actually having this be the score, there's once again like a dozen different ways to do this. The most straightforward is to actually bind this text value to the score number from the game mode. So we can click bind, create binding. This will automatically create a function for us that returns the text to set that to, and this will be called every frame. So what we can do is we get the game mode again, cast to first person game mode. And then we just get the score. And then we can drag that over to text, and it'll call this like really nice to text integer to text function. This is really great for localization, but everything by default should be good here. And then, so that's the UI. The other thing we have to do is add the UI to the screen. We can do that here in the game mode. You can do this in a number of places. On begin play, we can create a widget called Score UI, and we add it to the viewport. So you create the widget, you add it to the viewport, and that'll actually assign it to the screen. If you leave this second note out, which I do by accident a lot, you won't see anything. So we click save, go back to the map, click play, and wouldn't you know it, it works. Let's go back here. Let's delete that print. We don't need that anymore. Ooh, we don't need that anymore. So let's see. Let me do a quick time check. All right, we have a couple more minutes. The one thing I do want to touch on is let's like spice this up a little more, right? Like this is, as a game, it's pretty boring. Let's like actually give this some soul, like what you people would call polish. First of all, let's make these enemies not bricks. Let's like make them a custom texture that we make like right now. So let me pull up. Let's just use paint, I guess. So just drag your canvas into like roughly a square shape. And then we can have like, here's an idea. Video games are so violent these days. How about instead of destroying these cubes, we just, they're sad cubes and we want to make them happy cubes by shooting them with our happiness gun. So we have, let's like make a frowny face and make this black and there. Or, man, Microsoft Paint's so complicated now. And it's like a face and it's sad. It's a sad face. We can save that and let's make it black. And this one's happy. It's a happy face. If you want to import a texture into Unreal, right-click the content browser, import, and back to these. I think I can just select these both, and that'll import our textures. And then you can't just assign these directly to, ooh, okay, so you actually can just assign textures directly to things, but you have to convert them into materials first. Um, so right click it, create material. This basically turns it into something that can be assigned to a 3D object. Again, moving very quickly. Unreal has great documentation on this particular thing. So go to the enemy, go to this materials section, and then let's search for sad. Cool. So, real quick, check our work. Wow, it's a sad day to be a cube. But luckily, we have our happiness gun, and instead of turning them into nothing, let's just turn them into happy once we shoot them with the happiness gun. So we're going to create a new event in the enemy called we'll call it custom event, and then we'll call it like make happy. So now that we have our own event here, let's actually take some of this logic away from the first person projectile. So I'm going to do this. I'm just going to cut it. I'm going to replace this with make happy. So you can call events on other objects. And then I'm going to go to the enemy. I'm going to paste what I just cut. Well, you can use Control V. I'm going to get rid of destroy actor. So it'll increase score. And then we're going to get the cube. I'm just dragging that in from the side. And we're going to set the material. And we're going to give it the happy mat. So here we are. We shoot these. And now they're happy. And you can see the number go up for all the cubes we're making happy. And like this is a game, and this is I've paid for worse. So this is no laughing matter. And if I were making this for a game jam, even if this is all I got out of a weekend, I'd be happy with it because it's playable. And a lot of projects aren't. So I guess this is as good a place to start as any. Let me check time real quick. Yeah, so I'm going to move on to just a couple other things to talk about. I hope this was useful just to see. I'm sure things were very confusing. That's just how it goes. There's years of stuff to learn here, but basic things to keep in mind. If you want to know how something works, you can click on it. You can edit existing blueprints, play around with the existing example projects in Unreal. If you want to know how to do something in Unreal, literally type the question straight into Google. Even something as simple as like spawn actor will actually give you a good result. Just put the letters UE4 and then the thing you want to know. And then this high-powered thing can spawn all the sad cubes you want. And we have a game. So really quick, I just wanted to add this note on the end here about working with other people in an Unreal project that would have saved my butt so many times. And that is about how to share code and assets with other people working on an Unreal project. I filmed this little segment a few times, and I throw it away because it ended up being 20 minutes of me explaining like how to set up Git, and I don't have time to show you that. That's its own talk. There's lots of great resources on version control systems out there online. But if any of what I'm saying is means anything to you, if you're working in a group and you want to use GitHub, especially, please pay attention. So Unreal is built for using with version control. Again, it's built for teams with like hundreds of people if you want. So it definitely supports version control systems. It has integrations inside the engine for them, which is really cool. It's typically built for sort of older school version control systems like Perforce and Subversion. I won't go into the details of what that means. They're just different pieces of software. But if you know what that means and you have access to like a Perforce server, I highly recommend you use that because Unreal has beautiful integrations with it. If you want to use Git, it still works very well, but there's a few things that you should keep in mind. The first thing is if you are two people are editing the same like asset in your Unreal project, those files are generally saved as binary, and so they can't be merged if there's a conflict. So if two people are changing like the main character asset and they both want to like commit those, one is going to get in first, and the second one is like not going to be able to incorporate those changes, and you're just going to have to throw all that work away and redo it. I've lost so many hours because of this problem. So if you're using Git, because Git can't natively lock files, you really, really need to coordinate with your team about who's editing what at what given moment. And it's a huge hassle, but it does work. The second thing is if you are using Git and you're using GitHub, because that's almost synonymous these days, you can totally create a repository. I just want to point out there is a git ignore for Unreal Engine, and that'll save you a lot of time, like not accidentally sharing sort of intermediate cached builds. It's kind of essential if you are going to use Git that you have that turned on. The other thing is just in general, you should use a version control system if you are working with a team. Unreal sort of keeps headers attached to its assets such that like if you copy things outside of their file system and move them somewhere and like send a specific asset file to someone else and they just drag it in, it might not actually work properly. Like the engine might not read it. So the easiest thing you can do is just keep everything inside of version control. Again, couldn't really organically get that into the rest of the talk, but I've seen so many small team projects, especially at game jams, fall apart because of this. Just be wary about it, and it'll all work out great. All right, thanks for sticking around to the end. We covered a lot very quickly. I wish we had the 10 hours I wanted for me to really fully explain everything. I hope I made you feel confused enough that you want to learn more and actually figure things out. Um, so if you're working on a project, good luck with that. And if you have any questions, my Twitter handle's right here, and I'll, reach out to me and I'll see what I can do. Thanks so much, and good luck.